I lived on a dairy farm with my parents, and I used to milk cows in the morning and milk cows in the evening, besides going to school. I went to school in a two-bedroom, two-room school with 8 classes in 2 rooms. And then I went to high school, and that was a small school. We only had like 38 graduates. I lived on the farm after high school and worked for my father. The salary wasn't great, but I got free board and car and gas. The war broke out. My brother was drafted in the Army, and I thought I'd try something different, and I volunteered in the Navy. And I went to boot camp at Newport, Rhode Island, and every morning we went to breakfast, and after breakfast we'd line up, and 2 people were picked out of the 120 for either KP, or which is mess duty, or security, and which wasn't a real respected job. So anyway, that went on for a few weeks, and then they picked 2 out of the 120, and I said, oh boy, I have either KP or security, which I wasn't too fond of. And I went up and I said, which one do I get, KP or security? He says, oh no, you've been picked to go to hospital corps school. That's to be equal to a nurse. And of course our period of learning was very short because the war was going on. They needed a lot of people in the Navy and Army and Marines or whatever. So I went to hospital corps school, and I got out with a 3.8 average, which I thought was pretty good. As a farmer going into medical work, it was really a different situation. Got out of school and worked in the hospitals, naval hospitals for a while, and then the orders came in to be assigned to a ship. Well, the ship was an aircraft carrier, and I spent time for the carrier to be put into service, and we set out, we went through the Panama Canal, we went down Espiritu Santos in South America, and then we headed out to sea. We were out to sea for about 2 years, and we got to the last one was in October 24th, 1944 in the Philippines. The Japanese and the American planes were flying around like crows in the air. There were so many of them, and one got through and dropped a bomb in the middle of our flight deck. Well, the severe explosions for the high-octane gasoline or explosions, and I got injured some. Some people were badly burned. Some came my way, and they said, I cannot abandon ship. The order was given, abandon ship. Well, I was on a detail to stay a while longer than the abandoned ship abandonment program given, and I stayed on, and people would come up from down below, and to explain what an aircraft carrier is, it's got many compartments and hatches, which are doors, and those doors are closed when something like this happens. And those people that are in there, chances are, can't make it out. We lost about 300 men, and that was great because we had about 1,500, and those happened to get off. People would, sailors would come up to me with burns and so forth, and they said, I just can't make it. I'm going to stay here and just stay with the ship, because then all the engines were dead. We weren't going anywhere. And one of them came by, and his body was completely covered with an oil and cuts. And he says, I can't make it. I says, yes, you can. I says, you jump off this ship and go. Later, I met him on a destroyer that picked me up later on, and the salt water cleaned him up, so he did look halfway good after the oil was taken off him. We swam with the sharks. Lucky enough, none came near me. I knew they were there, but I just was able to get by. Many people were injured by the sharks. Destroyers came along picking up the survivors. And what they would do is drop a cargo net, which is a net that they transferred cargo from one ship to the next. And they threw those cargo nets over the side of their ship. And as far as I know in the Navy, ships do not stop in the water unless they're anchored, being anchored and so forth. And you climbed up those nets and you got up on the destroyers. And that's how you're saved. And the facilities on those destroyers, which they're a small ship, and they have their crew. And when we got on there with 150 men, there was no place to sleep. Eats were scarce, and we slept on the hard decks. And after that, we came into Pearl Harbor, and we were designated to go back to the States for reassignment. I got a good reassignment. I was at Treasure Island Naval Hospital in San Francisco, and that was a good assignment there. And I worked in the urology department there for 4 or 5 months, and then later was discharged out of San Francisco and Sampson, New York. That's my career in the Navy. And we did have many battles that we fought. You can train for survival, but things don't turn out as your training for survival exists. But we saved many people, and other than that, we did have survival practice, and we had general quarters every so often. General quarters was something that every time we got into a battle, everybody had a battle station. And I had a medical battle station in case somebody was hit, hurt, or injured. We'd get into an island like we got into one island, and we anchored in for a couple days for just some relief, and we'd have what they called a toucan beer party, and we'd go ashore, and starboard port, which is left and right as far as naval terms are concerned, and we'd go ashore and drink our 2 beers and sit under the palm trees or whatever it was, and tell stories or how nice it is to get on land. And it just reminds me of another time that we were at sea for 82 days without seeing land. And our navigator, who was a jokester, he came on one day and he says, oh, well, he says, we're not too far from land. And he says, he hesitated a while, and then he said, straight down. He said, we're 10 miles from land. There wasn't too many dull moments. departments. We had our friends, and if you're on duty, in fact, in our department, which was called H Division, that was, we had a room with bunks and so forth for the sick, or there was minor surgery and so forth done. And we had those rooms, and we'd sit there and shoot the breeze and talk to each other and so forth. So it never got really boring, and I spent at least 2 years on that ship, and at times we were at sea for a long time, and it was not boring. We always had something to do, and they didn't show too many movies because we didn't have the room. We had the flight deck full of airplanes, and there just wasn't room. And like I say, it was exciting to watch the planes get off the carrier. Some were taken off into the wind, and if there was no wind, then they had to use the catapult, which is a piece of equipment that fastens onto the plane and takes the plane off the carrier immediately, and he can get up and get into the air. But like I say, we always had something to do and always kept occupied, so you didn't get bored. And out of 1,500 people, I think, well, I was on that ship from the day it was commissioned till the day it was sunk, and we had very few problems with psychological problems or anything with the people. Very, very seldom we got one that maybe was homesick. You know, some of the fellows on there were 19 years old. I was old, I was 20. So anyway, that was it. But it was not boring being on there at all. Nobody ever said I'm bored, because the excitement, because you could always expect anything, day or night. In fact, one night we were out, and the Japanese were attacking, and the planes, they could only go out for 4 hours. We had to turn on the lights for the planes to land, and landing a plane on an aircraft carrier is not an easy job. Those pilots deserve a lot of credit, the ones that are on those aircraft carriers. Coming in at that time, it was the older planes, and they only came in about 100 miles an hour, where today they're coming in a lot faster speed. Of course, the carriers are much bigger today, and the equipment is better, but we still had our problems. They'd taxi up, and some of them would land, they wouldn't get, the tail hook wouldn't catch, and that was a hook that would catch a line that went across to stop the plane, because they came in at 100 miles an hour and they needed to stop. Well, sometimes they would take off the flight deck and didn't catch the tail hook, so it would gun the engine and they would take off. Well, planes were propped up front and the propellers still moving, and this one had his tail hook cut off by the plane. And you know, those propellers are strong, and the tail hook is probably thicker than my thumb. But anyway, he went out and he had to land on a larger carrier, and he made it. And he landed on there without the tail hook, which he had to run into barriers which were strung across the flight deck. Well, then about 2 days later, they sent him back to our ship, and he came in and he missed the tail hook again, and he gunned it again, but he couldn't make it off of that flight deck again, and that was the end of that pilot and ship. So, like I say, we had accidents frequently, and the pilots on an aircraft carrier deserve one bit of credit, a lot of credit from the people. Well, you know, it's the attitude of the people, especially in the Navy. It was all favorable. They knew they had a job to do, and they did it. And there were people that had jobs below decks, down the engine rooms, which was boring. Today, it's all nuclear, so they've got enough power in those engines last for months, where in those days we had to refuel every so often. And a lot of times when we were out at sea, we couldn't get into a base anywhere to refuel. We had to string lines, hoses from the tanker that came along and refuel our ship that way in order to keep it going. So it was exciting to watch. Of course, in the field that I was in, I didn't do any of that because we had our own job to do in the medical department. And we had about 12 corpsmen. In those days we were called pharmacist mates, but we were not pharmacists, we were medical people. And we had 5 doctors, and we had a flight surgeon, and he and one of the corpsmen would be up there on the flight deck all the time, because when planes were taking off and coming in, there were always accidents of some kind, because they just, when you land 30, 40, 50 planes a day, you're bound to have problems. When the war ended, that was, everybody was very, very thrilled. I was in San Francisco at that day. VJ night, I was in, that was when the Japanese war ended, VJ night. I was in San Francisco, and San Francisco has a wide street called Market Street, and it's very, very wide. And they knew what was going to happen. They had all these glass storefronts boarded up, or wall to wall on that Market Street. There wasn't any traffic. Even the trolley cars were forbidden on that street that night, and everybody was there celebrating, and it was a great occasion to be in San Francisco that night, which I'll never forget. It was a great celebration when the war was over. Well, when the war ended, I came home, and naturally I had a place to go. My parents were still there, and they still had the farm. So I didn't even ask if I had a job on the farm. I just went out, actually, and worked, whether it was driving a tractor or doing any type of work, or taking care of the cattle or horses or whatever it may be. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he says, you know, he says, he was working, and he says, you know, there's a job opening at Nabisco. You heard of Nabisco. You heard of an Oreo, right? And he said, you interested in getting a job? So I said to my father, I said, do you need me here on the farm? He says, well, he says, you know, you got a job here if you want to stay. But I says, well, maybe I'll just try something else. So I went and applied for this job, and I didn't know what it was, but I figured Nabisco, I knew what Nabisco was. And I went in, the fellow says, we have a problem, and I want you to work in a warehouse, I want you to work in the office, and so on and so on. He says, we'll see what we can do for you. So this is when I applied for the job. I figured, if I get the job, fine. If not, I've got a job. So he said, I have 6 more people to interview, and he says, when I decide, I'll give you a call. So he called me and he says, would you like to come in and talk to me again? I said, sure. So I went in and we talked, and he says, come in tomorrow. I says, how do you want me dressed? And he says, just come in a pair of slacks and shirt and whatever else you want. And so I went in and I did a little bit of everything. I did some office work, I did some warehouse work, and so forth. A couple weeks later, he came to me and he says, how'd you like a selling job? I says, fine. So he says, come to work Monday in shirt, tie, and jacket. So I says, fine. So I went to work, and I went to work with this guy for a week or about 3 or 4 days, and the boss called me in and said, how'd you make out? I says, I think I can handle it. So I went to work, and I worked in the retail division for about 20 years. Enjoyed it because I met so many people, and I traveled and was furnished with a car and a salary, which was good, and I had very few expenses because I lived with my parents, and they sure figure he's a survivor, so we can't charge him room and board. So I stayed there, and finally met this beautiful woman from New York City. And she came up to the country to visit her cousin, and I met her, and let's see, we met Valentine's Day, and we were married in September. And we had 3 children, and I have 4 grandchildren, which are all terrific. And it's been a good life because in selling, you're meeting so many people. It was interesting. I enjoyed it very much. And about 20 years after I was in the retail end of it, calling on stores and so forth, they organized a new division, and I got promoted into that, and that was supplying restaurants, schools, institutions. We would sell wholesaler, and then he would resell it to the institutions. And I did that for 20 years. And after 40 years, I thought it was time to retire. So it's the only job I really had in my life. It was with Nabisco. And it was a great company to work for. I had great number of new cars supplied because we did a lot of mileage, especially in my last 20 years. Then we lived in Middletown, New York for a long time, and then decided we would like to come to Florida. So we commuted. We spent about 3 months in Florida and 9 months in New York. And first thing you know, it was 4 months, 5 months, 6 months in Florida. So we decided on selling in New York, and I wasn't too enthused to sell because I belonged to a lot of organizations. I belonged to about 6 or 7 organizations, and I always got active in them, and ended up being president or whatever you call them in the organizations, and always got to be ahead of most of them. And I was a volunteer fireman as a younger person, and I still am on their list, but I'm a senior citizen member. And that was interesting, being a volunteer fireman. And in my time as a active member, which you had to be for at least 5 years, you had to attend so many fires and so forth and so on. I had 2 real bad fires that I outfought, and of course a lot of smaller fires where you go 15, 20 minutes and have them out. But these were a feed store and a big apartment building. I spent a lot of time at those fires. And this one time I went out, had my shirt, tie, and jacket on. I heard the alarm go in because we had a local radio station. They would list all the fires that were gone, where the trucks went. And I went there, shirt, tie, and jacket, and I was holding this hose, pouring on. And they says, "Hey, Rick, don't you want a pair of boots?" I says, "No, no, no, no. We poured so much water in that building, I was in water up to my waist." But it was a great thing to do for the community. And they still have the volunteer fire company in the Middletown. We have paid drivers, but the firefighters are actually paid drivers. Bring the truck to the fire, set the truck up, and turn the pumps on and so forth. But all the ones that really fight the fires are still volunteers. When you look at the situation in Iraq now, and you look it over and you see those Marines in there, they are doing some service for this country. The way they have to live, and they have to walk through the mud fields. Their eats are very poor. They have to live on some kind of K rations. And their sleeping quarters are not good because they're from here and there. But anyway, the Navy has its advantage too, which I never gave it a thought when I went in, because you went to bed every night when it was possible, and also you slept in a clean bed. There was no mud and so forth, and you got 3 meals a day. So the Navy was, it was a lot better than I thought when I went in. I thought it would be, and you know, after a while you got there and you got acquainted with the officers and so forth. I had a rate of pharmacist mate, and our superiors were doctors, and we would take care of all the people on the ship. I was injured. My hearing isn't bad because I can hear you, but I was injured. This eardrum is perforated, and in fact, I was recommended to get a hearing aid, but as long as I can hear, I'm not going to get a hearing aid. And I was burned, and I was injured, and for that, when I was examined after the incident of the ship being sunk, I got the Purple Heart. And I have medals of a different kind that I got during the service. I never got a Medal of Honor or one of those, but I think if I had witnesses, I'd have probably been recommended for those. But when I was in the ship, taking care of the ones that were coming off, up from down below, and they'd come on before they were going to abandon ship, I think I saved 3 or 4 lives, I think, by forcing those people to go off. I knew they were capable, but they themselves thought, I can't make it. And you had to jump, you know, those carriers are high. The flight deck is about 100 feet from the water. And of course, when we'd anchor into some of those islands, those fellas would have the courage to jump off that, dive off of that 100 feet flight deck into the water. That wasn't my cup of tea. I know I couldn't do it. But anyway, we had fellas that would get up there and jump right off of that flight deck. And it was permissible. I mean, the captain probably saw them. Oh, and then an incident that I forget is when the ship was sunk. We had a man on there who was a captain in the Navy, which is a 4-striper, and he was our captain. Today, most of those ships are, their captains are admirals, but they still call the top dog, we call him the captain. And he was on, and during one blast, he had his foot cut almost completely off. And the corpsman, which in those days were the pharmacist's mate, put a tourniquet on him and cut the rest of the foot off because he knew it was not going to last. If a Reader's Digest, which came out years ago, wrote an article up on him, and he was called a peg-leg admiral. He made admiral, and he did the command of a station somewhere. They didn't put him on the ship, but they did, or not completely correct on that, whether they did put him on another ship or whether he was assigned to some naval station somewhere. But he was an admiral, and by now he has to be deceased because he was older than I am, and I was or am, whatever, and he's gone by now, but he was going to take over. But he did succeed staying in the Navy with the peg leg.